Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am at the place where I ordinarily think of as the social pond. It's the largest, very small body of water in the botanical gardens. And okay. All right, so the whole topic that I was going to talk about has just dissolved into another topic because I am watching one of the most astonishing things, but I have defected by being willing to make this recording instead of simply attending and participating in what I can see. And what I can see, that was really trippy. So what just happened is I'm watching the water and its surface is very mirror-like in the afternoon. And the surface is fairly calm, but it is warbling. The surface of the water is warbling. Or maybe that's an auditory term. But you can see very complex patterns of gentle wave-like movement all over the surface. And in that movement are reflected trees fairly clearly. And as I watch the wavelets passing along the length of the tree, they produce a visual situation, but they also produce a sort of self-amplifying wave within the other waves that suggests a hidden dimension of movement. Right? That there's a dimension orthogonal to our visual senses that is suggested by the pattern of the ripples and the transformation of the reflections. Now, one thing I don't know is, where is the reflection? It's a three-dimensional sense. And when I look down into the water, it is as if I am looking up into the sky. And the whole affair is extremely profound, but what happened a moment ago is that some crows flew by, so I was watching the crows flying in the upside-down mirror. And they were calling to one another, and the calling appeared to undergo a dramatic frequency transformation, sort of a reverse Doppler. where at first the calls were high-pitched and common, and then as they got just a little further away from me, they transformed and seemed to elongate and lower in frequency. This social pond, I call it this because it's very protected. Water birds passing through the area might be likely to at least visit this spot, especially if they needed protection, though there are nearby coyotes. And I once at night heard what I'm fairly sure is a coyote preying upon a duck, because the duck made sounds I have certainly never heard from a duck. Now I'm still watching the water. And it's so funny. There are certain phenomena in nature Okay. Actually, it's much weirder than that. By the way, I've been kneeling, and there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 carp looking up at me from the water, right where I've been kneeling. And it's enchanting to think that it's all the magic of I love the carp and they love me, but I'm pretty sure it involves them having been fed by humans for many, many generations and being synanthropically linked and aware of humans. So this phenomenon that I'm experiencing, which I have defected from by talking about it, let's be clear. It's like I see the most beautiful woman in the universe. She beckons to me, and instead of embracing her, I'm going to lecture about her beauty and profundity to my peers, right? That's the degree of ignorance I'm displaying at the moment. So funny, on the other side of the little bridge, the sun is reflected in the water, and the situation is so much different. It's almost like a different universe on these two sides. On this side, the sky is blue. There are a few cotton balls. The reflections of the trees are bright green and golden and gray and different colors. On this side, everything is like black and white. There's a painting of tufts, thin, layered tufts of cloud. The reflections of these trees and the palms are all black, and the sun. Also, the wavelets are not complex in the same visual way they are on the other side. So one of the things I was asking a moment ago is, where is the reflection? It is not obvious. We all will think the reflection is clearly on the surface of the water. This is our natural, rational mind. But I suspect that, like the rainbow, the reflection is not located anywhere at all. It moves as I move. You know, instead of if a tree falls in the forest, is there any sound? Perhaps a similar but more useful in some ways question is, if the light hits the water of the social pond and there are no eyes seeing it, is there a reflection there? Like, is the reflection actually there? Now, with these kinds of questions, we should acknowledge, I'm going to be very rational for a moment, a problem with the question. If a tree falls in the forest, there isn't a forest without other sonically sensitive creatures. And the plants themselves are likely to be sonically sensitive. all of the bacteria in the soil, probably sonically sensitive. So what he's really asking is something more like, but he's using the wrong theater, because you won't have a forest without beings. Like a forest is unembodied, both unitary, it's just one thing, and diverse, the many, many participants. All forests are like this. So there is no forest. And then you can take the question apart a little bit differently in language and ask, a tree falls in a forest with no humans. Since humans specify sonic vibrations in atmospheres with the word sound, and there are no humans there, does a sound emerge? There's lots of ways to approach the question, right? Is there a sound if there are no humans to call it a sound? Is another way. And then, I think as I said previously, not to repeat myself, but inside a box, if I click a clicker and there are no observers and nothing, we can insulate the box from the outside. Does a sound happen in there? What happens in there? What is that? And obviously, it should be obvious to us that at the very least, unobserved phenomena comprise unobserved phenomenon comprise a special category of conceptual reference, right? Unobserved phenomenon are the subjects of human cognitive conceptual manipulation, right? So they exist, but they exist in the subcategory, right? They first exist for us in the category of what we might call imagination or speculation. Now there is a problem where if you removed humans, I'm not sure this is actually possible, but you might be able to extinguish them. But if you removed humans from Earth, all human concepts go with them. At least, presuming that the resulting now, and then again now, right, the resulting existence, iterations of existence, except they're not iterations, it's a wave. I think the raptors are mating this moon. They're being particularly demonstrative today. Katoi, the moon where, at least in the Blackfoot territory, it's different in different places. But this is the winter moon where food supplies are running out. Our survival depends on us sharing together. It is cold. Little ones and elderly, some of them are dying. There are accidents. The ice and cold are severe. Food is difficult to obtain. Have to share from whatever we have stored up. Probably the concept that interest in commerce, compounding interest in commerce, is a lethal abstraction of. Right? The extra, right? We have to share the extra, and if you invert that, you have to give us extra because we had a relationship 10 years ago. for a minute. You have to give us extra forever. All right, so much to get at here. Without exhausting my listeners, and thank you for bearing with me, all of you who do. Was it Bishop Berkeley question about this tree in the forest? I can't remember for sure. But the question of where's the rainbow, a question meaningfully posed in my experience by Owen Barfield in Saving the Appearances, subtext, A Study in Idolatry. Really interesting subtext title there. Similarly, I think the reflection in the water, I am really not sure where that is. It is probably in the relationship between my awareness, the sky, the water's surface, light, time. I mean, my body, my ancestors, this place on earth, this time on earth, all these things, right? All of these produce the reflection in the water through their complementary participation or something, right? In that each adds something to the recipe until what emerges is, and this is where things are going to get a little weird, folks. What actually emerges is a portal to another universe. Nobody who hasn't experienced this, and certainly nearly zero rational, pragmatic, scientific people or science-y minded people, there is no chance of them believing me. Apologies for all the noise. It's weird, I went from a literally placid, calming, profound, visual experience to a very disturbing auditory experience. Hopefully most of that is done with. Where was I? Yes. So, no one will believe, very few people will believe, that reflection on the surface of the water comprises a transport, which is what I just suggested. Now I'm going to make other absurd suggestions of similar ilk. In fact, they're going, if you think that's crazy, wait till you see where I'm going. I remember a beautiful afternoon a long time ago when my father was with me and I took him to a place in these gardens called the Moon Pool. And the Moon Pool's purpose, well, the reason it is called that way has to do with a traditional Japanese, a specific Japanese tradition involving the creation and maintenance of small, beautiful pools of water in which one could observe the moon on clear nights. Ironically, this moon pool cannot be used unless you break the rules of the garden and stay often long after closing. No one really comes to kick you out, generally, though they could. possible. Now I understand. Wow, I just learned something astonishing. But I've got to stay with the topic or we'll just keep branching wildly. The people who came before us, the people of long ago, especially before there were cities and when the peoples of the human peoples have very intimate relationships with living places and creatures and developed very sophisticated and intelligent traditional knowledge systems. That were technologies in the sense of partly being comprised of methods, but they were relational technologies rather than physical technologies. The ancient peoples were aware and sensitive to and sensorially and consciously aware of and receptive to what we could call languages, but we'd be lying. Transformations of the manifold of consciousness and relation in the living places around them. And some of those peoples who have existing progeny still maintain some portion of the library of the knowledge they once held. And others there are examples in which either the knowledge wasn't preserved or it was not very well developed. And I mention this just so that we don't become confused and think Darren means all indigenous people were relational geniuses. It seems unlikely. The diversity of tribal forms and places and times and situations produces a diversity of what we might call more and less I keep wanting to use the word intelligence, but it's not correct. Branches where there are complex forms of deep relational awareness and understanding, and branches where there are less complex forms of tool making, problem solving, so forth. And by the way, once you start getting towards tool making, the thing's probably going away soon. Because by the time that happens, colonists from elsewhere are going to bring guns and just wipe you, and disease and gold and whiskey and whatever, just wipe you out. But, and enslave what they can't wipe out. Because those people were already infected with that disease themselves a long time ago. In any case, the ancient peoples knew something that I'm going to talk about today. And this came up in a conversation with my dear brother J.K. the other night. And what a conversation that was, I gotta say. in a sense, where I'm going to go now is in a direction related perhaps to teleology. The associated questions why are there humans? And what are we supposed to be doing? Presuming that there might be, whether or not there's in the sky a great supposed to-er, Tony and Johnny supposed to, right? We wrote the book. Right? What you're supposed to do. We live in Jersey. Yeah. So whether or not there's a great supposed to-er in the sky, there certainly are a vast array of forms of relational prodigy that the human animal is born equipped for and becomes uniquely more equipped for throughout each of its developmental cycles, as if literally you were looking at a kind of a flower that develops multiple different forms of blossoms, each productive of both nectar and pollen in different life phases, and even in different circumstances. The shape, mode, and the kind of a pollinator that's being sought by this invisible flower inside us changes dramatically, right? And in a sense, holy shit, okay. You could imagine, I'm actually having trouble because of the profundity of the metaphor I've just stumbled on, which I have never seen before. Shit, okay. So, you can see that all of the features of modernity have weaponized the production inside us in our felt sense of orientation, purpose, motive, all these things. Potential relation, actual relation, simulated relation, potential intelligence, actual intelligence, simulated intelligence, potential romance, actual, right, simulated, potential sex, actual sex, simulated sex, potential heroism, actual heroism, simulated heroism, all of these, potential wealth, actual wealth, having probably nothing to do with money, simulated wealth, the stuff you get in video games, right? You can see that all of the branches of the domineering, penetrative, false masculine aspects of civilization, modernity, commerce, language, concept, religion, politics, so on. These are causally shaping, and I would argue amputating. They're amputating the kinds of flowers inside us that don't produce pollen and nectar they can steal and commodify, right? Which is these days just human attention. Primary commodity on the face of the earth isn't money, it's human attention. So you can see these basically non-human protocols or algorithms. They are a vast library of para-algorithmic processes that infect humans at the level of relation and cognition. These processes I call thrisps, right? They reshape the flowers we will produce to those better suited to extraction, right? That's the goal, extraction. Slavery, extraction, rape are basically the primary goals enacted by thrisps in human megacultures and small cultures. So all of these things are shaping the flowers I was talking about, but those flowers were meant for relation with actual pollinators. And this is the crazy thing. And what are the actual pollinators? Well, they are nature itself. Well, themselves. I don't know what the pronoun for the source of pronouns is. But the earth as a biorelational hyperstructure, which is more than a being and produces beings as an intentional side product of its natural activity, and being the same kind of a flowering differently over time thing, whose pollinators exist in crude physical form, as if the earth were an ovum in the gravity womb of the sun, whose gender we need not state, since there's not going to be any gender without that thing around here. Once again, you have a meta position, but if in this model, for just to trigger people, we call the sun masculine and the earth feminine, and we imagine that the earth is a transcendent biorelational hyperstructure in a sort of a marriage with the fabric of time-space, the transcendences that dwell there, and the sun, and the moon, of course, then we can see the transformations in the moon change the kinds of literal flowers the earth produces, change which pollinators tend them and why, and so forth, right? So I'm enraptured by this metaphor because as single humans, we were born for kinds of relationships we don't believe exist. We don't have language or concepts for them. And some of the only similar things we have are things from religion, some specific branches of philosophy, basically zero, well, not zero. We can get a lot of symbiosis. Wow. There's certain branches of biology and perhaps psychology that could teach us something about these matters. And then we have addiction, which is basically the frustrated selection of substitutes for pollination that would otherwise be occurring if our culture wasn't both failing to produce the contexts in which the pollinators thrive, much as we're doing in the actual ecologies of Earth by poisoning them and monoculturing them. Right, we're doing these things. Our species does the things that that's the reason the metaphor is so powerful, right? So just imagine over time you're meant to produce all these different flowers, different forms of nectar, different kinds of pollen, some features of which are penetrative in that they outwardly seek for relational participatory fulfillment, and some receptive in that they actively attract and filter, just like the other one does, forms of relational intimacy and fulfillment. Give me a moment, I'm recalibrating. Hi. And you will notice this principle in every aspect of human behavior. Right? This is so foundational. And this is what happened is I started at a pretty foundational point of interest, and then I slipped accidentally by watching the reflection into a much deeper one. And then, due to my great good fortune, that happened again, and I came up with a metaphor I've never seen before. Well, I've known this before. I never formalized it in consciousness so that I could say it. So you produce these flowers over time, different life phases, different flowers. You almost never see authentic pollinators. Gods and angels, demons, vampires, zombies. These are representative supernatural fictions or myths, right? I'm not saying they're fictions exactly. Clearly there's plenty that's vampiric about human culture, or rather, especially human technoculture. And similarly, there's, zombiedom's real. Or at least we've made it real. Lycanthropy, there must be another word that just means to change into an animal. Perhaps the word wall might have that connotation in some circles. That's real. So I'm going to circle back. Where is the reflection? Why would I say something so crazy sounding as, under certain conditions, human consciousness is able, and by consciousness I don't just mean the kind of thing we're familiar with, I mean the actual stuff. The essence of our being, which we could call a soul, is able to utilize features of the natural environment to achieve what I'll call a perceptual and relational and possibly a temporal superposition. And from there, it naturally will travel. It is made for travel. And this is what I meant earlier when I talked about teleology. What are we here for? Why? What are we good at? What are we supposed to be doing in one kind of language? And what are we the most fit for that we are relatively unaware of in another kind of language? Now, ancient peoples developed technologies that were amechanical in the sense they were relational and they were fundamentally features involving the intentional transformation of consciousness. And I will argue that one of the most common goals of that attempt, which very often succeeded, probably nearly always succeeded in the cases of many of the humans who've ever lived, in fact can succeed for us pretty quick under the right conditions and with a little help. And by help I mean relationships, not drugs. Though drugs under some conditions can produce related phenomena in consciousness. Cooper's hawk. So what are we fit for? And what I'm trying to say is that in the same way that fish appear to be fit for swimming, we are fit for travel within the body mind of something we have never, well, some science fiction and fantasy authors have conceived of at least things that resemble it, but something we have no common concepts about at all. The closest concepts we have are things like words like the universe, time space, creation, reality existence, the possibility space. These are phrases that point at what I call the supercontainer, which is the everything. It's the parent from which all phenomena inherit their qualities and potentials, purposes, if they have such, purposive natures, which they certainly have. So I think it's important. Okay. It's important to not have an explicitly closed model of the supercontainer. Right? If you think you have a firm grasp upon it, that mistake will make you dumb and trap you in all kinds of ways. So, whatever the supercontainer is, I'm going to call it the universe with an asterisk, and the asterisk represents everything everything I don't know, can't know, haven't said, can't say, and the actual possibility space, discovery space, and so forth, all these things. But I do not think of it as a thing. It's not an object. The asterisk is its non-ordinary originating aspect. So we have to have incompleteness baked in. And this is something English is terrible at. In any case, I think you get the idea. You don't want an explicit closed definition of the supercontainer. Anything that tries to explicitly close it and say this is what it is, it comprises an attack on the supercontainer. And some of those attacks are useful for perspective, but some of them are lethal for what they evict from our awareness and access. So, when I talk about time space or the sun or the earth, I often use the term transcendent. It's a neologism which I invented, I think, more than 20 years ago in my writings. But whatever the universe is meta to that. I don't have a word for that. I mean, the only word I have is originary or something. And so the universe is not a thing. It is not merely a being. It is a category above being, in my common thought. But nonetheless, in consciousness, I tend to personate it in cognition and in category. Or I meta-personate it so that it's more than a being, but being-ish, if that makes any sense. And we are meant to travel in that. We are born for travel in that. I would argue that we are born from travel in that. Now, there are many other ways to look at this, but when William S. Burroughs, who said a couple of very interesting things, one, he probably isn't the first person to say this, but he's certainly the first to popularize it, I think. Language is a virus from outer space. There's probably a lot more wisdom in that comment than can possibly appear immediately to consciousness from considering its implications. And that turns out to be true even if the statement isn't true, right? It's such a useful lens that it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's really useful for those who intend to make good use of such a lens. But the other thing, and this is the thing that struck me when I was looking at the reflection in the water and wondering, where is the reflection? And, in case someone thinks they can answer this question, they can't, because it's impossible to produce an unobserved reflection for testing, right? This is why the unobserved comprises a special category of things we can think or speak about, speculate about. And sometimes we can weasel our way into a method of observation, usually technologically for humans. But for the older humans, they didn't have, Large Hadron Colliders and things. They had to do the experiments with consciousness and transforming it. And what I will argue is that if you merely, there are many layers, and if you just go up one or two, up isn't necessarily true. If you move one or two layers, there's sort of two directions, right? There's a direction more toward physical sensation, which turns out to be filled with portals to travel in, right? If the physical sensations become, if they are intensified in certain ways that don't merely cause us to shut down or run away, they lead to feedback events that resemble orgasm. And let me be very clear that the physical orgasm is one branch on a tree with 1,000 branches, or maybe an infinite number of branches, that humans are capable of developing. And not so many of the people who become connoisseurs of physical orgasm will come to understand that there are other kinds. And when I speak of travel in the thing I haven't named yet, that is one of the kinds. That is an ecstatic experience of liberation from everything familiar. Well, not always. From many limitations that are familiar. And what I was arguing was that the ancient peoples, if you want specific evidence of this, in stories of Toltec and perhaps Aztec, Mixtec, and other South American and Central American indigenous peoples, there are traditions where training for a certain kind of travel involves mirrors. Now, obviously, it was difficult. We can't be sure of this. We are likely to think it was difficult for ancient peoples to produce good mirrors. But they had bowls of water. And they could also produce black mirrors, obsidian mirrors. We have the tropes of magic that involve gypsies looking into crystal balls and so forth. And I'm not trying to denigrate that trope, only to say that it doesn't originate from having been made up. It's not from make-believe. One can train consciousness to produce feedback with almost any form of a shiny surface. Under the right conditions of feedback, the consciousness will begin to travel. There's various different kinds of ways it can travel. That flower that I spoke of, the invisible flowers inside us, the cycles of flowering in our life paths throughout our life histories. These are meant to attract pollinators and produce a broad array of, rather than children, what I will refer to as prodigies or geniuses. Now, when you see someone doing something that looks relatively superhuman, you have 5-year-old children playing the guitar with a skill rivaling or exceeding that of well-studied adults, or you have a singer, on one of these shows that are monumentally popular, who looks like nobody, ordinary person, and they open their mouths, and the fucking curtain falls, like it's over, right? What's coming out of that person is like unadulterated, ecstatic prodigy of enacted being. So, this is actually our nature as humans. In one sense, not all of us at all times, but we are supposed to have direct experience of the forms of prodigy and genius that each of us naturally produces, but especially that we can only produce in synergy with others like us, others of like purpose, history, tradition, agreement. This is why the devastating self-colonizing diseases of modernity, we must establish a bulwark against them together for each other. We must do something other than that together, now, for each other. To whatever degree we are capable of just moving in that direction. We don't have to get it right. We don't have to get it perfect. We just have to learn each time we make a move. Right? And hopefully we're doing that. Hopefully I'm doing that even right now in this walk and talk to some degree. So Burroughs said something else, something rather enigmatic and profound, which is that we are here to go. Now, many have supposed that what he meant, and certainly part of what he meant, was that we are here to go to space. We are made for well, Burroughs was highly critical of humans, and clearly he was aware that we are not merely human, number one. Number two, under certain conditions, non-human intelligences can simply step down into this layer and inhabit the sock puppet that appears to be a human body. Now, these are extremely dangerous things to be aware of for anyone inclined to melancholia or paranoia or schizophrenia or psychosis. Very, very dangerous ideas. So I think he meant, we're here to go to space, but I suspect, and I certainly mean something much, much crazier than that. A moment. I shall return. All right. Recalibrating. What the pointer, the points in the direction of that within which I say we are made to travel. What it's pointing at can be conceived of in a broad variety of ways, and it is something we hope to encounter, but we are also terrified of encountering. And there are many layers, different layers we can differentiate. Some of them are familiar to us. So, for example, we have two words that are important here. One is trance, and the other is dreaming. Now, ordinarily, when we use these words, we think they refer to one thing. This is not the case. Our actual potentials are profoundly different from our expectations. There are many different aspects and kinds, of dreaming. And there are many different aspects of trance and kinds. And they are related. I have arrived at the edge of a still small but much larger body of water. And the reflection upon it appears, I'm looking toward the sun, toward the direction of the sun and its reflection. And at the social pond, the very colorful, elaborate, and inviting reflection was on the other side of the bridge from the sun direction. Perhaps the reflection will change when I make it to the other side of this lake, which used to be called Stowe Lake and is now called Blue Heron Lake, apparently. So the thing we are made for travel in. And you'll notice that if we want to discover what humans are made for, we just have to watch what they actually do. And then expand so that we can see that from outside of it. And we will then be able to understand new things about its structure, telos, purposiveness, features of non-human ontology, not merely human ontology, and not merely human epistemology. You can see that if we make circles for ontology and epistemology, similarly if we make a circle for what a human is, right? Actually, let's start there. So the first circle is the thing I'm pointing to that we can travel in, that we are made for travel in. Some would call it the universe. I think that's the wrong reference frame, because it's not merely physical time-space, though physical time-space is quite profound. It's something that produces physical time-space either as an intended effect or a side effect of what it is and is doing, much like the sun produces. The sun plus the earth plus the time-space plus the organisms plus the moon, etc., is productive of minds. So the thing we travel in, or can travel in, I call the MaiArch. And it has the connotation of the specific branched vectored array of near and distant neighbors of my families of originary intelligence and nature, coupled to all others. So it is everyone and everything, but it is also a layered near neighbor library of arrays. It's also a living library of everything that is possible, that ever happened, that could happen, that can't happen, all these things. It is a library, but the books are not things. They are more than merely beings. And we can travel in this. This is what we are made to travel in. This is what we do when we are dreaming. It is what we simulate when we use our smartphones or the internet. It is at the same time impersonal in many ways and profoundly personal in many other ways. In fact, it has no qualities. In general, its qualities are produced by Engle purpose vector of approach. In a sense, perspective. If you circle an object in visual space, you will see very surprising things about its shape. Oh, a flying heron is an amazing thing. Amazing being. I am circling the lake. The reflection is still similar to before, though in the shadows there's more. So the other night when I was talking with JK, and I'm not using that in the meme sense of just kidding, I said something like this. The biorelational hyperstructure the Earth is and supports is actually a broad array of vehicles, and the humans are perhaps the animal, in some senses, endowed with the most diverse opportunities to join with that vehicle Sorry, there's a heron flying right over me, and it's pretty astonishing. To join with that vehicle in ecstatic, mutual travel, relation, exploration, recollection, adoration, wonder, ecstasy, awe, play, all of these things, learning. And so in a sense, from this perspective, we are like fish. We are like fish who are being kept alive outside of water which we have never experienced. And the water for our kind of fish is what the symbiotic communal activity of the organisms of Earth are doing and are being. And when we are placed properly in that water, which in many cases is best done simply by removing all that impedes that, right? It's not necessarily we got to add something. We have to get rid of a bunch of things. We have to stop paying attention to X, Y, and Z in order to naturally kind of attune, if you will, to the ambient wave-like pulses, not just the frequency. These words are value-laden from woo culture and so on. But even though they're value-laden from woo culture, we should not dismiss the idea, right? There's a phenomenon called photic driving, which okay, so we're going to go back to William S. Burroughs. One of his close collaborators and companions, Brian Geisen. And similarly, one of my strangest and most brilliant friends, David Woodard. Geisen appears to have invented a device known as a dream machine. I have one of these, which was composed by David Woodard in the 90s. This device uses a turntable and a geometrically carved tube, inside of which there's a light bulb, to produce flickering, visual flickering. And the device is usually used by placing your face close to this rotating cylinder and closing your eyes and letting the flickering happen at a specific rate. This flickering with eyes closed, and it certainly has a profound effect with eyes opened as well, is productive of feedback in our nervous system, particularly the visual system. That pulsing begins to set up a standing wave in the nervous system. Once there's a standing wave of some kind in the nervous system, and I would argue that trance and hypnosis are similar, in some forms of them are similar to this, or even essentially are this. Consciousness turns out to be a bit like water. If you can get it pulsing, you're likely to be able to produce what I will call, gosh, what do I want to call this? Let me describe it. Or rather, let me point at some analogies for it. So, tears, crying, authentic crying, is a version of this, where our awareness, our consciousness, coupled with our emotionality, our sensitivities, our concerns, our history, so forth, these things combine to comprise a sort of a waving pulse, and that waving pulse eventually collapses into crying. I can do this very quickly on purpose if I simply call to mind certain events from my life. Laughter is another example of the waveform suddenly achieving a kind of ecstasis from its ordinary layer, right? Opening into a new layer. Obviously, human sexuality doesn't always only involve rhythmic stimulation, but profoundly involves it. Temporalized, mutual, not merely stimulation, but like evocation, invocation. Again, wave-like phenomena, right?
Me too. Yes, yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say is that there are many forms of waves we can produce, and lots, if not all of them, have a sort of a portal at the top of a certain way of making the wave, or a transition from one order of feedback to a new order of feedback that is different and more coherent. Now, obviously, we can crash, right? Like psychosis and schizophrenia and paranoia and megalomania and things like this. These are naturally occurring modes of feedback producing not entirely incoherent modes and orders of it, but I cannot easily explain the difference between the pathologies and the superfunctions of humans because they're so intimately related. Nonetheless, it is possible to produce waves in awareness in the body, with the body's energies and so forth, that naturally lead to emergence in a different order of awareness, ability, and so forth. The singer on stage is doing this. The guitar player is doing this. The dancer is doing this. The football player on a good day is doing this. The orator is doing this. The author doing this. The animals are doing it too, but they're not doing it as represent. Yeah, that's a dangerous sub-branch. I'll stay away from that for the moment. All right, so we are here to go. Here to go where? Well, trivially into space. People like Elon Musk and Eric Weinstein and a number of others, want to take humans to space. I would definitely put the cork in the bottle of that genie until, oh wow. At least until the humans are capable of forming societies intelligent enough to know what not to do. Otherwise, you know, as in the story of what? Babel? You know, the gods, Elohim or whatever, are concerned that the humans will tear down the foundations of heaven. And humans plus machines certainly have that ability. Humans without machines might have that ability. So I would put a cork in that bottle. I don't think the imperative mustn't be quick, get us to other planets we can destroy with the same insanity we're destroying this one. But rather, get us to experiences that will teach us how to be human again together. And travel in the MaiArch is that kind of experience. And we are partially doing it when we dream. We're almost there. And we are also uniquely, weirdly close to it when we have hypnagogic experience in the liminal space between waking and dreaming, and hypnopompic experience in the liminal space between dreaming and waking. These resemble dawn and dusk, right? They're both a transformation of the light. They also resemble the two sides of the bridge in the reflection. They are unique transformations of the light with a library of useful features and potentials and opportunities, each with unique libraries of these. For a long time, I have been very concerned about problems with dreaming in humans, and particularly the eviction of dreaming in childhood. And I thought, the ancient peoples, when they were conducting ceremony, many things were happening here. This is not a one thing. You know, my friend JK was asking what were the pyramids for, and I said something like, if you build something like that, it's not for one thing. The ancient people seem to have understood variously among them, in different times and places, how to build things with many, many features, right? The dumb analogy is a toolbox. The very dangerous upscale analogy is a computer. Jump one scale up from that, you have what the humans are referring to as artificial intelligences. Very complex topic for another essay. And one of the things that motivated me to begin recording today, because I was listening to Brian Keating interviewing his friend Mo, whose last name I cannot recall at the moment. And I, with all respect, some of Keating's perspectives about the likely danger, what the actual dangers of AI are, seemed to me to be well, I don't wish to defame Dr. Keating because he's brilliant and I love his work. But some of what he said that he felt might limit the danger of AI seemed quite naive to me. There were so many things I'd I'd like to say about that, but I'm going to resist the urge to stay on this topic because thankfully that problem led me here through a strange series of labyrinthine twistings and turnings. It led me to recall the conversation the other night with JK, and when he asked me what the pyramids were for, I did suggest some possibilities, which I will mention here because they're covalent with the topic of this conversation. What I said was they're probably for, 7 crucially important, astonishing things and 24 others. Right? However, when he asked me that question, what I asked him in return was, have you ever been to the mountains? And we were actually talking about Jewish religion and Islamic religion, tangentially. We were talking about Moses getting the tablets from the mountains. But I just asked him, have you ever been to the mountains? And he said, yes. And I said, did you, was it different there? And he said, yeah. What do you mean? And I talked about the first time I went to see, actually the only time I went to see Mount Shasta. And this is a big deal for me. There was a very intense rainstorm covering part of the route there. And when we got there, I remember seeing the mountain from a little village nearby that had a sort of what you call it, a kiosk, except it was all old barnwood, sort of messy, crazy, picnic, benches outside, like you'd see it at a park. And the town was very old style, little village, not really a town. Anyway, we got some food and we were looking at the mountain from afar. I don't know how much to trust this memory. I just know what I remember. And there was lightning happening around the mountain's peak. And I remember it being orange and green and blue and purple and yellow and white and just stuff I've never seen anything like it. I've seen quite a bit of lightning living in the San Joaquin Valley. Nothing like that. I was completely blown away. And as we were sitting facing this direction, from behind me, I hear what is clearly an indigenous song. A man is singing. And I can emulate the kind of sound, though I don't know his song. This sort of thing, right? I'm telling you, straight up, that what that guy was doing was conditioning our minds and our souls in preparation to travel. He was taking us to the runway, not the airport. But he told us stories of the mountains and the flood. He told us that the bear took all of the animals up to the mountain because the bear knew the flood was coming, and that it came, and that they did not know whether it was safe because there was a terrible fog or something. They could not tell if it was safe to go down, so they sent Crow, who was then white, to go look. And he told us that the mountains are a family, too. And this I ended up having a direct experience of when I was there. By the way, when I was watching that lightning and listening, I was not intoxicated. I was in my, what we could call, sober consciousness. Haha. And he just came in and basically gave us the ancient equivalent, not of an intoxicant, but of a form of relation that conditions awareness so that it becomes uniquely more like, it starts to form the traveling body, right? And the moderns have all kinds of stories about shamans and so forth, but they don't understand this very fundamental thing, that one of the features of your being is a traveling body. And that thing, if you wake up in your room and you go to turn the light on and it does not go on, and then so you think to yourself, as I once did, okay, there must be something wrong with the light or the electricity, let me get my flashlight. And I go to turn the flashlight on and it doesn't go on. And then I may flash through a variety of discrete states very quickly, so that unless we could slow consciousness down, we will not be aware of the transitions. And I realize, something more fundamental is wrong. It's not a problem with electricity. Something strange is happening. I won't here delimit the 7 different states that I might quickly transition through once I begin to notice, how could it be that my flashlight doesn't produce light? Is there a problem with light? Right? And that particular question leads in the direction of travel, and often right after that, the person will realize, oh shit, I am still asleep. Right? And by the way, I say oh shit as a kind of exclamation, but that exclamation turns out to be important, because I will argue that our guts and our intestines function in an unusual way when certain conditions obtain and the physical body begins to produce a traveling body. And this form of usually hypnopompic problem that I am proposing here, what is happening can be understood from an array of useful perspectives as the attempt to form the traveling body, but it failed. It didn't completely switch over to the next layer, so to speak. The waveform did not form the second rung on the ladder of forms of feedback that it can form, or the third, right? Wherein the fourth one is you just start to travel immediately. You don't intend to travel. You don't have to intend to travel. The traveling body is like a bird in the air or a fish in the water. It naturally just travels in the MaiArch. Right? And this is what was probably pointed toward by the Castanedan traditions, which are distortions probably of traditions proper to certain tribes in South and Central America over certain periods of time. But when in Castanedan traditions we hear the word sorcerer, we are in the presence of knowledge ways that encode for these abilities, right? So to nahualism, to become an animal, this is one of the forms of travel. I would argue our species was evolutionarily produced for, in a sense, and also by, in another sense.
Oh my god, 38.
30.
He's like, I've been married once. 37 women at the same time. It's so funny, there's also an episode where like all his wives are there in a room.
It's so funny, the conversation I just stumbled into, my God. Only in San Francisco. Oh, that car almost got hit by a bus. Even though the bus is making noise and there's all kinds of lights. So the conversation's really important in a sense. A beautiful young couple, very striking. We're talking and about to eat candy, caramels, I think. And the man said, I heard him say 37. And the woman laughed and said 38. And clearly they were talking about harems. And the woman made a joke. She said, yes, he told me he'd only been married once, but to 37 women. And you know, by all means, rather than attack the idea, flip it over. You know, she had only been married once to an entire tribe of men. And all the spaces in between, right? Monogamy has powerful origins in biology, but that rung of the ladder leads to other rungs. And all I'm trying to say is your idea that you are physically located in space is mostly wrong. It's true only for certain waveforms, so to speak, of consciousness. The form that we are trained to use in childhood to navigate representational human culture is a trap. We are fish made to swim in 90,000 kinds of different water. Each kind does different things. And instead of water, we are being made to experience sand, hot, dry sand, lethal to the traveling body. We're made to experience that as if it mimicked some features of water, and the better it mimics some features, the more, quote, popular, unquote, it becomes. This is the death of the traveling body. This is torment for fishes or birds, right? So in the situation where I wake up, I try to turn the light on, it doesn't go on. I try to turn my flashlight on, it doesn't go on. And lots of other strange adventures happen. Sometimes I'm kind of half drunk, I'm like stumbly, and I know something's wrong, and I leave the room and I try to go find help, but there isn't any, and I try to come back to the room. Then literally, in the prescient language of Madeleine Engle, naming her second brilliant book, A Wind in the Door. I try to re-enter the room in my half-formed traveling body, right? I'm stumbling around in my house. I don't know what's going on. I try to re-enter the room in which I'm sleeping, and there is a wind blowing out from the door. And other non-ordinary effects. Sometimes, often, right at the edge of some portal, one will encounter a force that is like a kind of living electricity. And by the way, that's the boundary between the rung of the ladder where consciousness is not yet producing totally coherent feedback that will naturally promote the state to the next position above it, so to speak, a superposition of its previous position, a position with more degrees of liberty than its previous position. It doesn't have to be up or down or in or out, either one. Naturally, we suppose up is better, so people are like, raise your frequency. Yeah, not necessarily a good idea, especially for humans ignorant of the dangers and necessities of such things. So yeah, there's often a wind in the door. I can't remember Engle's first book, its title. Perhaps it'll come to me. I mean, her name literally means the angel. Madeline the angel is trying to teach little kids about these matters. And in her books, the children both, well, I think they meet an angel, but the angel resembles a tesseract, if I'm remembering. This is a long time ago. When you see the pictures of the angels and the thrones and the dominions and the seraphim, the cherubim, all of the orders of the angels, which I say these words with honor, not derision. Almost all of them have wings. Notice that? What does that mean? It means they travel in the MaiArch. And there are certain forms of stillness that are productive of travel. Notice that when we have hypnagogic or hypnopompic experience, body is paralyzed. Okay, there's so many little branches here. So yeah, you think you're located somewhere in space and somewhere in time. It's not untrue. But the scope of that familiar sense is extremely limited compared to the scope available to your awareness. And I don't care much about the objections of people who have not had such experiences, people who don't want such experiences, certain kinds of scientists and philosophers and materialists and so forth, especially eliminative materialists. They'll just be saying things like, yeah, your brain can produce a whole bunch of different kinds of hallucinations. And if you want to get lost in that, it's the same as just doing drugs or... No, it's not. It's not at all the same. Because one can... There's a library older than time that our bodies are made to participate in. All the discoveries of those scientists are derivations from that library. What I'm arguing is that the library can be contacted directly by individual humans for purposes. It can be, you can develop relationships within that library that are extremely profound and beyond the wildest hopes of science or religion. I'm going to argue further that the incredible diversity and profundity of the anciently conserved ecologies of Earth actually provide an array of local amplification lenses that the ancients were adept at understanding, participating in intimate, meaningful relation with, and operationalizing in order to both make discoveries and also to enact medicine, to have clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, all of these things. These are natural to humans the same way swimming is natural to fish. Probably for most of our history we were telepathic because instead of having to wait for a dream or to go into trance, 6 or 7 of those lenses were lit up and structuring consciousness while we were awake. Right? There was an array of relationships in the MaiArch and in the actual living ecologies of Earth and the living places, the mountains and so forth, that were so robust that it was impossible to live or think in terms of things. Everything was beings. Friends, relations, families, everything. The stones, everything. The sky, the cloud, the sun, everything. And I'm not necessarily recommending that we return. We try to go back to this. We have changed. We are a different animal now. But we can go forward and discover that there's something we can explore together that is actually more profound than if we had spaceships that could go to other planets. Much more profound. Because there are layers of the MaiArch that are accessible to human consciousness, intention, intelligence, relationality, participation, that are, if you will, above distance. Imagine, for example, that there is a form of feedback you can produce in consciousness that takes you to a position from which all moments, minds, persons, places, and situations are with you. There's no distance between you and them. They are your body. Now, from that position, you can begin to form derivations over the manifold that are naturally transcendent. They are not merely intelligent. They are, in fact, they are morally and ethically superior to anything that can be done with concepts. Because from that position, it is impossible to defect from communion. You can't do it through ignorance. You will have no desire to. In a sense, this is what is proposed by moral and ethical perfection. It's not perfect behavior. It's relational integrity, naturally resultant from unification of the layers in consciousness. So what was I saying? I talked about the mountains. I just want to close that thread. So with JK, I talked about what happened to me at Mount Shasta. And much more happened there. But it was very profound for me. Even though I was in my ordinary waking consciousness, or so I thought. And I didn't realize what the old Navajo man was doing with his song. I appreciated it and I was respectful, but I didn't yet understand what that song is for. Or even, yes, there are many things I did not understand. And there are many things I do not understand. Right? Even my speculations today, these are new, nascent, experimental derivations of what I have become aware of in my life experience and thought and relation with the MaiArch. So when I was talking about the mountains, I said, it's very powerful. The world is different near the mountains. It doesn't seem accidental that the humans, in many of their stories, they go to the mountains to have congress with the gods. This is not an accident. This is not superstition. Literally, what you're talking about, okay, look at what the moderns do, right? The moderns make skyscrapers, we call them. They're too dumb to make pyramids mostly, or large spheres, or domes, which probably even be. Those two things should go together, actually, pillars and spheres. Because what you don't want to do is produce something penetrative without producing something receptive nearby. And so the humans, the moderns, they make skyscrapers, and what do they put on top of them? Lightning rods and so forth. I don't know the actual functional history of that process or whether it is still done, but it was common for a long time. To draw the lightning to ground, perhaps. So you can see the relationship between lightning and mountains in the story. You can also see the relationship between stories about gods and meeting the gods and the mountains. It is not the only place it happens. But what you actually have is a place where the earth rises up and becomes much closer to what is beyond the earth, the sky, time-space itself, and all that it is filled with, its histories, its families, all of these things. So you get a point on the surface of the earth that is vastly closer to Earth's membrane, and from there, travel's a lot easier, to put it mildly. And so you'll meet. Eventually, spend enough time there, you will realize that the lowlands are not the same planet, in a sense, right? Yes, the same planet, but not the same world. So when the Egyptians were building the pyramids, or the Aztecs or other people were building South American pyramids or pyramids in other places, there was something going on about relation with the sky. And thus, I would argue, the MaiArch. Not time-space, they didn't have that model, but they probably had traveled in the MaiArch, and I will argue that there's evidence for this. Some trivial evidence, in a sense, relatively trivial, is that one of the Blackfoot heroes, Scarface, comes down from the sky with his mother. They get in trouble for something in the sky. His mom gets in trouble. And they're going to cast her down to earth, so to speak. And she has a young male baby. And Spider-Man, who is Orion in this case, in a sense, Orion is his web, part of his web, perhaps. He lowers a strand to the earth so that she and her child don't just fall. And her child acquires a terrible scar from being burned by the fiber of the web on his face. And in Blackfoot tradition, as it was shared with me by Ryan Firstiver, this is where my very poor knowledge of such matters comes from in this case. This man becomes kind of a hero, but also a bit of a troublemaker. He has an incredible adventure, a romantic adventure. He goes to visit the Sun's Lodge on a quest. He acquires some medicine there, and also his by doing the sun a favor, he earns a boon. Boons from divine beings are often extremely dangerous for humans, if they indeed are humans. The fundamental question here. The sun removes the scar from his face. English translation of his name, which I cannot recall the Blackfoot word for at the moment, but the English translation is Scarface. And when he dies, he returns to the sky and becomes Jupiter. Now, it should be blatantly obvious that either this name is entirely accidental, it is nothing but coincidence. The Blackfoot people did not know that Jupiter has a great big scar on its face, or they did. And people who believe in physicalism, materialism, that everything is knowable, that is mechanical, that knowledge is that true knowledge is knowledge of mechanics, and dead matter accidentally forming organisms and so forth. These people will have no way to understand that the ancient peoples had traveled in the MaiArch. This did not require spaceships. They were capable of forming the vehicles for such travel individually and together. This is a natural feature of the MaiArch that is so much more profound local to Earth that it's almost as if you were born on the paradise of waters, right? You were born in the land of the many waters, and all of the waters were obscured by language and commerce and extraction and technology and modernity and concepts, so that your experience of that planet was one of many deserts. This is the great tragedy of the children who are born today. In places where the old traditions have been snuffed, or converted, or extracted, or worse, represented. Right? Symbols. Now look, symbols, in a sense, they are like the pyramids, right? They are, consider the metaphor of the many flowering being earlier in the talk. That is a symbolic metaphor, and it's extremely rich. And the symbols are like the pyramids in the sense that they are not, they don't have single purposes. They're not one-use tools. So when I was talking to my friend, I told him the biosphere is a library of traveling ways, and the humans are one of the forms here most profoundly endowed with all of the different ways of producing heroic prodigy from travel in the MaiArch and the formation of relationships in the living world and the MaiArch. And the living world is, from this perspective, a beautifully complete reflection of all of the different features of the MaiArch. All of their features can be found here. And most of them look like organisms and relationships, behaviors, forms of participation, methods of structuring conscious awareness, or in some cases unstructuring it so that it's natural, so that the library of its natural forms arises directly in experience without the necessity of being intentionally manipulated and so forth. Wow, okay. I had no idea that I would be... I've almost done something kind of impossible, which is I used to have a neologism for this. There's certain things you can speak of that are so profound that the mere speaking of them begins to become the inaction of them. And I strongly suspect that what we refer to as ceremony, as, white folk or Westerners, there were far better terms for this that were much more indicative of what was actually going on. And I think what was going on was that there are ways of singing and dancing and remembering together that naturally begin to produce both the vehicles and their purposes. And I think I've accidentally been doing that today, if I'm super lucky. I'm going to pause here because I'm coming to a place of a lot of noise and I don't want to subject you to that. I shall return. Okay, I was about to talk about a problem that happens when, it happens for me sometimes, when I'm really on fire. This has happened very provocatively a few times in my life. I'm completely on fire. I'm doing the Icarus thing, right? Doing the Icarus game. My dad has given me, so to speak, a toy. Daedalus, right? My dad has given me a toy. And I'm I'm traversing, I'm the ladder, right? I'm going up the ladder, sometimes too quickly to pay attention to what's going on. And my goal is to create something that others can use to climb with. But I also don't want to just give them wings, right? The same way that I don't want to give my infant, to the ocean, or drop it from a mountaintop or something, because there's all kinds of confusing problems and dangers that if I were able to just directly give them wings, this would be trouble. This would bode ill. So, anyway, often the artifact is destroyed, right? On my phone a few times, recordings have failed to save. So what I did a moment ago was just take the time to allow the recording to completely be digitized and then begin again. And I was about to talk about, well, one of the things I was talking about previously was the peculiar ability, I think I can demonstrate it actually. And I've done this before. Apologies for the noise floor here. I'll pause for a moment. All right. So, if I say, this is one of the best examples I can come up with easily. I used to have better ones. I cannot remember them, for I had no one to discuss them with, and over time they faded. But this is part of why I make these recordings, because I have to practice what I've learned, or it fades. And I also have to have some way to apply it, or it fades. Mere discussion isn't enough. It has to somehow be enacted. Thankfully, there's certain kinds of speaking that enact it. I'll try to give you an example. If you imagine that consciousness is a bubble of many bubbles, what we do when we produce language or speak or write is we form sequences of collapsings of that manifold into words. And that is what I am doing right now to produce the language that you are hearing from my voice on the recording. So I've described a fundamental principle that is a perspective on how I am describing anything. Right? In a sense, I've encoded a foundational feature of my enacted behavior in language so that it becomes visible to consciousness and can be referred to. And when one is doing this, it is a kind of magical thing. And this is what the rhapsodes do. Those who emotionally captivate and manipulate us. The comedians and those who tell us, the storytellers, the movie makers, the actors, the actresses. And also, in a sense, the little children. But the little children often are very different from the adults in that it is more likely for them to be doing it unselfconsciously, although that's a very complex statement that I can imagine refutations of. So when I'm really lucky, I manage to go beyond what I've seen before using principles of what I've seen before. And I would argue that we are indeed here to go. And the direction is, in a sense, in the Castaneda tradition, they have a privileged use of the word infinity. I would prefer to substitute the word MaiArch for what they mean. But one of their beliefs, apparently, is that at death it is possible to sidestep the entire process that ordinarily obtains, and effectively travel the MaiArch without limitation, without inhibition. So we have traversed vastly richer terrain than I had initially imagined. I'm very grateful to all of you, my traveling companions. It is a privilege and an honor for me to learn together with and for all of you and the history and future of life on our world, and the hope of deeper awareness, understandings, and the recovery of our innate potentials for prodigy as human beings on a world largely estranged from it and furiously manufacturing replicas of features of its appearance. Thank you for joining me. I wish you beautiful ways and lives, relations, and opportunities as always. May you find that medicine, those medicines that most restore, encourage, reassure, and empower you with their potencies. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to doing this again together very soon. Bye-bye for now.